Hi everyone, it's great to be joining this conference, and even if only on Zoom, I'm very happy to meet you all. So the paper I will present today is very much work in progress. It means that the title has changed a little bit. So it's Animal Exhibitionism as Pedagogical Work, a critical analysis of environmental celebrities' exotic animal media shows. And before I move on, I would just like to say a few words about the two books that I have published, Animals in Schools and Schizoanalysis and Animal Science Education. They both explore how human-animal relations and subjectivities are formed in the education system, and also the function of education in the animal industrial complex. So I investigate the formal education system in both books, but in the talk today, I will do something else. I will look into more in an informal mode of education, public education, via media and TV shows. So, an early morning TV news program show. In the studio, the two hosts, a man and a woman, share the table with today's invited guest, a male, well-known zoo manager and an expert on exotic animals. An exotic, potentially dangerous animal, it could be a snake, spider, or alligator, I've seen all different species, is placed on the table between the guest and the hosts. The hosts react on the animal with nervosity and fascination. They ask questions about the animal, and their guest explains pedagogically, with all his expert authority, everything that is worth knowing, including basic biological facts, as well as the cultural history of the animal, while pointing to, poking at, grabbing at, and steering the creature. When the animal makes moves toward the hosts across the table, or makes sudden signs of aggression that may or may not be explicitly provoked by the expert, the female host jumps up from the table in fear. The expert assures the hosts and the audience that there is nothing to be afraid of, and that it is important to treat the animal with respect. So it seems like exotic animals, especially those animals with a capacity to harm humans, are inherently useful to support certain men's authority positions in the media and public space, by giving these men rich opportunities to show off their expert knowledge, pedagogically and often with a hint of humor, to the unknowing TV hosts as well as the audience. The animals also seem inherently useful in giving these experts an aura of trusted scientific authority that we can safely rely on. We can feel assured that the expert will protect us from these animals, while also protecting biodiversity and the animals themselves through wildlife trade and zoo conservation programs, since a key message of the show seems to be to promote these businesses. So, in this paper, I'm interested in the pedagogical aspects of these shows. So what sort of pedagogical work is engaged when these animal experts take on the role as public educators? What are the premises of this kind of popular education? And what are the implications for the animals involved? So there are several incarnations internationally of the animal expert media profile. We have, for instance, people such as David Attenborough in the UK and the late Steve Irwin from Australia, to name a few. And Sweden also has its share of these experts. Although these discourses around so-called environmental celebrities have been analyzed in media studies, less attention has been given to what their celebrity status means for their pedagogical work and implications for public education about wild animals. Now, Kate Rosmanis found in her study on non-formal and community-based crocodile education approaches enacted by Australian wildlife rangers that they worked in accordance with an information deficit model based on the assumption that the community need to be taught science, and this can be done by depositing knowledge into people's minds. And this information deficit model of public education resonates, as we will see, also with the Swedish examples that I will discuss in this paper. So the confluence of celebrity and nature conservation has a history dating back to the early 20th century. And the proliferation and transformation of the contemporary media landscape has provided multiple venues for this phenomenon. Some celebrity conservationists manifest their intimate relationship with wildlife by getting as close as possible to the animals. People such as David Attenborough uses this approach, and this is David Attenborough that you see depicted here on the screen as well. While others do it by forming special relationships with specific animal species. We have people, for instance, such as Jane Goodall, Dian Fossey, Birute Galdikas, and so on. And yet others, such as Steve Irwin, demonstrate their closeness to wildlife by mastery and control over the animals. While the women celebrities mentioned are often also activists. For instance, Dian Fossey was brutally killed for her work to protect mountain gorillas. This is rarely the case with the men, who seem more inclined to use the conservation message and the animals to promote their own media persona and careers. So this paper focuses on two examples from the Swedish environmental celebrities genre of the latter category, those who seek to sort of promote their own careers and media persona. And these examples have been selected because of their long-time roles, since the 1980s at least, as public educators and celebrated national experts in Sweden on wild animals. So in the Swedish language, there is, to my knowledge, no equivalent term to the English notion of environmental celebrities. But still the phenomenon exists, and its history can be traced back to the 1960s, when Swedish nature programs on TV primarily featured what Hillevi Ganetz has described as male collectives engaged in hunting and fishing in the Swedish countryside. From the 1970s, however, the collective was reduced to one single male. And this single male was followed by a number of other male program leaders, pedagogically explaining the mysteries of wildlife to a Swedish TV audience. In Lars Berger's words, these program leaders introduced a new kind of male archetype in Swedish public space, the jovial and knowledgeable nature expert. And these experts guided the TV audience across Sweden's diverse landscapes of high mountains and deep forests, but also to more exotic destinations such as the Galapagos Islands and India's jungles. And I quote Berger, "It was a world belonging to trusted men with soft voices and the ability to speak the animal's language," end quote. So in the 1970s, one nature expert in particular, named Jan Lindblad, who was a wildlife filmmaker, took it upon himself to transform wilderness to popular culture and became immensely loved for this work. Now, calling it circus tricks, Lars Berger writes that the TV audience could curiously watch, and I quote, "a well-groomed man in tweed costume and neatly tied tie, throwing his head in all directions, opening his mouth widely and emitting the creaking sound of a toucan," end quote. Jan Lindblad, writes Berger, does not only film exotic animals. He actually stalks them, seeking as intimate contacts with them as possible, even lives together with them, especially two tiger cubs that he took over from a zoo to nurture in his own home, apparently oblivious to the potential danger this could entail. Lindblad claimed in interviews to be able to speak tigerish, and that his tigers believed that he was a tiger too. Berger concludes that Lindblad's films are not primarily about wild animals, but rather about himself. Now, there are a number of successors to these Swedish 1970s pioneers of environmental celebrity. And this paper will focus on two of these people, Jonas Wahlström and Ove Sandström. And while there are obvious differences between the two men, the discourses surrounding them also point to remarkable similarities. And I will begin with Jonas Wahlström. As the longtime owner of one of the most famous private zoos and aquariums in Sweden, Jonas Wahlström has built up a borderless empire around himself, with seamless interfaces between his business and his private life. In his rurally located home, he has engaged in lucrative breeding and trade in rare and endangered animal species, supported by his wide network among politicians, media people, CEOs, and public authorities that he has established friendly relationships with and hence been able to circumvent regulations of wildlife breeding and trade. According to an investigation by one of Sweden's national newspapers, authority officials have heard from their bosses that one shouldn't mess with Jonas Wahlström. Jonas Wahlström has appeared in numerous TV programs and shows. In the 1980s, he featured in a series of children's TV programs, teaching a child audience about basic facts of different animal species kept at his zoo, while implicitly also promoting his own business. A decade later, he brings an enormous snake to a popular Swedish music show and hangs the snake around the neck of the show's clueless host on stage, generating loud ovations from the delighted audience. And since then, Jonas Wahlström has appeared in numerous TV shows, sharing more or less incredible stories about how he has obtained his exotic animals. He is skilled at appealing to his audience using humor and a positive, light-hearted, charming attitude that is easy to be captivated by. However, Jonas Wahlström is also a central figure in the Stockholm branch of the International Travelers Club, which is a social network of businessmen, entrepreneurs, diplomats, scientists, physicians, and other professionals who get together to share experiences from their worldwide travels. When Jonas Wahlström hosted a Travelers Club party at his zoo, one member accidentally got his arm bitten off by an alligator. And this scandalous incident triggered an in-depth scrutiny of Jonas Wahlström's affairs that had until then largely passed under the media's radar. Now, Ove Sandström's career path diverges a bit from Jonas Wahlström's. Rather than building his empire around his private-owned zoo, Ove Sandström emphasizes his achievements for bringing wildlife into the formal education system. From what he calls his private menagerie in his own home, in the 1980s, he brought exotic animals to the upper secondary school where he was working in order to educate the pupils in animal science, an approach that was at that time quite unheard of. And soon the animal department at the school grew to a minor zoo, which was possible, according to Ove Sandström himself, because of his good contacts and communication skills with local school administrators and policymakers. Ove Sandström's narrative about himself is replete with episodes about exotic animals, but also frequent name-dropping of Swedish celebrities who purportedly admire him and constantly seek out his friendship. Besides his pedagogical work in upper secondary school, he has had multiple other animal businesses, working as a safari guide in Africa and Galapagos, as well as at various Swedish zoos, appearing as a ethology expert in popular TV programs, organizing spectacular horse shows, and so on and so forth. And when reading interviews with him in the media, a carefully manufactured narrative is repeated about his remarkable achievements and his important knowledge contribution to society. And he even calls himself, as I understand with no trace of irony at all, a Renaissance human being, whatever that means. Anyways, it's a rather grandiose claim to make about oneself. So what common features then can be identified in these two now quite elderly representatives of Swedish environmental celebrity? Well, a couple of remarks can be made. First, both men are self-centered, building up a narrative around themselves as environmental heroes and saviors who are admired by an impressed audience. They don't only build narratives, but also economic and institutional empires around themselves. And the boundary between the private and the business affairs is porous, to put it mildly. Both men boast about their good contacts with bureaucrats, authority officials, and powerful politicians who, according to the celebrities themselves, are eager to please them. They boast about their relations with also cultural celebrities and tend to become included in these cultural celebrities' sort of aura of fame. And they also boast about their multiple travels to exotic countries linked to pedagogical and economic animal businesses. Further, they like to point out how they continuously have managed to prove their skeptics wrong when these skeptics say that their ideas are not possible to realize. And they see as their pedagogical mission to inform an unknowing public about wildlife and biodiversity, but have no concerns about trading, breeding, and manipulating animals and keeping them in zoos. They appear in TV shows and programs where their adventures and expertise is supported and admired. Until very recently, as far as I know, they never had to face really critical questions. So going back to my research questions then, I argue that the commonalities that I have just described constitute the premises of both Jonas Wahlström's and Ove Sandström's pedagogical work, enabled by an enthusiastic media collective, allowing them the important public space and venues required to develop their communication, their appearance, and their didactic style. The premises are further that they have established a universe, a kind of hierarchy, where they themselves are on top, having the special mission to show off and explain exotic animals to the public. In this way, nature's saviors, to use Graham Haggam's term, uncomfortably approach the white savior narrative. Hence, the premises for this person's pedagogical work accommodate problematic and unquestioned assumptions of coloniality, ethnicity, gender, and species hierarchies, not to mention the capitalist logic that they are a product of and that in the end seems to drive them. So what pedagogy could possibly come out of such a toxic blend? Well, I go back to Kate Rosmanith that I mentioned previously in her study on Australian wildlife rangers' community-based crocodile education approaches. She found that the rangers worked in accordance with an information deficit model, assuming that the community need to be taught science, and this knowledge deficit can be fixed simply by giving people information. Now, this view of public education resonates partly with the two examples Jonas Wahlström and Ove Sandström that I have presented. They both clearly see science education as primarily about information dissemination. However, there's also another aspect that comes into play here as well, and that is edutainment. Now, edutainment broadly denotes some form of entertainment designed to promote knowledge and learning, according to Moss. And I have elsewhere analyzed edutainment as playful jokers and the specific techniques of capture in animal science education. And this is in my book that I mentioned, Schizoanalysis of Animal Science Education. Now, edutainment work seems to offer something else than the monotonous routines of fact-based learning, ostensibly associated with conventional forms of science education. As an entertaining method of educational delivery that can hold the attention of an audience, very often with an emotional response among audience members, according to Moss, this seems to be exactly what is going on here. Showing off exotic animals on primetime TV with a friendly, didactic, and often humorous approach claims to be a more progressive form of education than reading texts about these animals. And this edutainment mode of public education is also familiar from zoos and aquariums. And still, the view on education as an issue of sharing information remains, with the teacher as an omnipotent expert authority who should not and cannot be questioned. So asking genuine critical questions is not imaginable here. It is simply outside of the discourse that these animal experts have created around themselves. So what we have here is therefore the same old hierarchy imposing authoritarian didactics, masquerading as progressive education through edutainment. But this is not all. It is a pedagogical work that draws on and feeds into colonialism, sexism, and speciesism, as well as a capitalist logic relying on global animal trade, breeding, and zoo business. It is a pedagogical work carefully designed to be lucrative for the environmental celebrities' own animal businesses and private capital. And for the animals themselves, both the individual animals forced to interact with people in TV shows and participate in the edutainment spectacle, as well as for the animals kept in zoos worldwide, whose captivity is supported by these pedagogies. The animal's subordinate position is firmly entrenched. Indeed, it is a way of strengthening and rationalizing the market niche of global animal trafficking through pedagogy. So the message sent to the audience that zoos are important wildlife conservation institutions is, when communicated by these celebrities, not open for debate or critique, which is quite contrary to basic insights in how education should presumably work. The message also implies that animals are accessible for trading, breeding, manipulating, and displaying. Exactly the same instrumental view on animals that arguably has contributed to our current ecological problems and declining biodiversity. So to conclude, the pedagogical work of Swedish environmental celebrities has been widely admired, but is far from innocent. Their teaching the public about exotic animals is carefully orchestrated to feed into their own personal empires by manipulating not only the animals, but also the audience, the media, and society at large. Still, these celebrities do teach us one important thing: to keep asking them critical questions until the empires fall apart. Thank you very much.